Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Parent Pit Stop. I'm going to hang on a few minutes, so hopefully some of you will be joining. And as you join, if you can just sign in the comments by putting your name, tagging a friend, saying hi, whatever the case might be, before we get started. Also, if you have any questions or comments, they can go right in that comment section. I track that as we're moving along so I can answer any questions, or if you have any feedback of any of the things that you've tried in the last 4 weeks. It's hard to believe this is session 5, but if you've tried anything that we've gone over in the last 4 weeks and you want to let us know how that's going, or if you have any need for clarification on any of the things that we talked about, you can also put that in the comments as well. So we've talked about a lot up to this point, and tonight we're going to be talking about intent and consequences. Lots of us know old school consequences, which really involved punishment and was always punitive. But we're talking conscious discipline and a whole new way of looking at things. So consequences take on kind of a different kind of tone, so to speak, that go hand in hand with everything that we've discussed up until this point. And one of the things that I'm going to go over tonight, according to conscious discipline, there are 7 powers, superpowers that parents possess, and we're going to be discussing some of those, and some we've already discussed. So I'm just going to start with the first one, which is the power of perception. And the big idea behind the power of this perception is that no one can make you angry without your permission. And this goes all the way back to the second week when we talked about the STAR. Stop, take a deep breath and relax. Make sure that your emotions are in check. Make sure that you're calm when you're handling anything that comes up with your children. And don't use terms like, "you're making me so mad," because what you're essentially doing in that moment is giving your power away to your child, and also letting them know that they have the power over you to make you mad. You always want to remain calm to bring calm to the situation. So that's the first superpower, is the power of perception. Knowing that you're in control of your own emotions, and knowing that that's something that you're trying to also teach your child. The goal is to teach adults and children to take responsibility for our own upset. That's one of the things that when we talk about social and emotional development, we're talking about regulating behavior, not us regulating, us teaching our children how to regulate their own emotions and their own behavior. And in order to do that, there has to be a certain amount of accountability that we instill in them and that we demonstrate and model for them. So that's the first superpower, the power of perception. Another one, power of free will. And the big idea is that the only person you can change is you. So again, in any given situation, all your parenting situations, you always need to be taking a look at your part in that, and what you're bringing into that situation with you, the baggage that we bring with us, and that kind of thing. The goal is to perceive compassionately. Oh, sorry, wrong one. The goal is learning to connect and guide instead of force, coerce, and control. So again, there's that whole theme that we've been talking about in thinking about where we want kids to be when they're 26. Everything is a teachable moment. What we're not geared to be doing is punishing all the time, but guiding and teaching those skills to our children that they're going to need lifelong skills, and also to teach them to learn how to make good decisions, be in that prefrontal lobe, always operate from there, because that's when people make good choices. That's when all the problem solving takes place. That's the part of the brain that we want adults to be in, and our kids, but keeping in mind that our kids' prefrontal lobe will not be fully developed until they're age 26. So there's a lot of learning and practice that's going to go on well before that. Then I'm going to skip down to the power of intention. The big idea, mistakes are opportunities to learn. So again, I think in one of the sessions I mentioned there's no misbehavior, it's mistaken behavior. And what we should be assuming is that our children are learning, and behaviors happen sometimes more than once because it's all part of that learning process. The goal is to teach a new skill rather than punishing others for lacking skills we think they should possess by now. So again, when you find yourself saying, how many times do I have to tell you? If you think back to one of the things that we talked about, and I think the very first session, is that repetition is part of how kids learn. So I'm just going to tell you that as a parent, you will be repeating yourself a lot. That's part of the gig. So again, knowing that, accepting that, and knowing that repetition is going to happen as part of the learning process for our children. We just have to remain calm, and we have to kind of shift and reframe. If we go back to our glasses, in order to change a behavior, we have to change the way we look at the behavior or we see the behavior. So that's the starting point for us. So intent is something that we want to have positive intent when addressing our children about various things that go on. So positive intent versus punitive intent. So I'm just going to give you some examples of intent. So again, stop, take a deep breath and relax. Know that you need to come from a place that's calming so that you can pass that calm on to your child. Knowing that you're teaching something at every given moment of your day. And getting into that frame of mind where you're breathing, you're being calm, and you're talking your children through, those types of situations. So here's an example of a negative intent. Some children are just mean. So again, now we're reframing our thinking to positive reframing, and that same thing translates then to some children need social skills. So, you might see this between siblings, you might see this in classrooms where a child is constantly hitting their peers, taking things away, and someone could very easily say that child is a bully. But the reframing of that is that some children need social skills. That's something that has to be taught. Negative intent might be, they sure know how to push my buttons. There's something that's escaped many parents' mouth in the world. And the positive reframing of that would be, they don't know what to do to get their needs met appropriately. So again, you can see we're going from a negative, which means we're putting out negative, to in our mind, reframing that to a positive way to identify what needs to be done to turn those behaviors around. Negative intent, he's being hurtful for no reason. Positive reframing, he has a hard time managing his frustration. So that's really interesting because part of what comes along with intent is judging. So you can see by that statement that I read for the negative intent, he's being hurtful for no reason. That's a judgment call on our part. We don't know that. We just are assuming that, or we're saying that out loud. We're judging what's happening in that given moment. And the reframing part is he has a hard time managing his frustration. So you can see the difference and the shift in all of these examples that I'm giving you. You're identifying the need in that moment that your child has and not judging or looking to be punitive to control and correct a behavior. Because when you're controlling, coercing, and going down that road, you're not teaching any new skill. And there's no learning going on in regard to that social emotional development and more appropriate behavior. Another negative intent, he keeps others from learning. So this would be a classroom thing. And a positive reframing would be that he learns best by discussing new concepts with others. So again, very big shift, but it puts you in a different frame of mind. And that's the thing about positive intent, is a lot of times we have to look at our own intent. In the busy moments, like we've talked about before, we just want that behavior to correct. And so sometimes we say things without thinking about the message that we're sending, or that message that we have in our heads that's now coming out of our mouth, how that's already putting the situation in a negative frame of mind and setting up for those power struggles, no learning taking place, repeated behavior, and that kind of thing. Negative intent, she's disrupting the whole class. A positive reframing of that would be she gets bored after completing her work so fast. So again, the reframing brings about solution-based approach versus the judging and the punitive type approach. So negative intent, a child pushes another child. Positive reframing would be saying something like, you wanted a turn with his ball. So you're identifying exactly what's going on and you're noticing what's going on. We talked a lot about noticing last week, and noticing is really, again, one of the superpowers is the power of attention. And that goes back to that noticing that we talked about last week. The big idea, whatever we focus on, we will get more of. So if you're focusing on the negative, inappropriate behavior, then that's what you're going to get more of. The goal is to create images of expected behavior in a child's brain. So this goes back to the indisputable brain development that we talked about early on. Brains develop in a certain way, they're wired a certain way, and we really need to work that with that and not against that. So if we know that we want to wire that brain a certain way, there are certain things that we have to do as parents. So positive reinforcement, noticing, and that would be noticing the behavior that you want to see more of when it happens, and saying, Johnny, I noticed that you shared your sandwich with your sister because she was so hungry. That was the nicest thing to do. That sends a message automatically to a child that that's a behavior that they're getting noticed for, and therefore they're more apt to repeat that behavior again. Does that mean there's not going to be setbacks? Absolutely not. Again, we're back to there's a lot of repetition in parenting. Okay, another negative intent. A child ignores your direction to shut down the computer. This is a tricky one because computers are on all the time now because of all this virtual learning that we're doing, and we're trying desperately as parents to put some space between how much screen time our children are getting and the required amount of screen time that they have to have because of the virtual learning that's going on. But it's also long before we started this virtual learning thing, this was an issue that parents were having a very difficult time with even before virtual learning. Children got very addicted to screen time. We, without really thinking, put the screens in the hands of our children, not knowing the situation we might be creating. And it, for some kids, it got really bad, and trying to take a computer screen away from a child could result in a meltdown, lots of arguing and fighting, power struggles. So there's that screen time computer, getting a kid off a computer existed long before this COVID situation, and it's something that we've been addressing with parents for a very long time. So your positive reframing would be, you were hoping you could play on the computer longer. Again, like we spoke about last week, a timer is an awesome thing. It can help you cut down on time when a child has 15 minutes before dinner or whatever the case might be, or when you have siblings and there's turn taking on the computer, a timer is a great thing. Negative intent. Emma takes some of Elton's popcorn when he's not looking. And your positive reframing would be, Emma, you wanted more popcorn? That kind of stops the whole situation in its track, and then you start to have a conversation to give language and to help children learn that language of what they need to do instead of waiting till their brother's back is turned and taking the popcorn, using the words to say, could I please have some more popcorn? Negative intent, a child grabs a pencil from another. The positive reframing in, you wanted the pencil with the big eraser on it so you could erase your mistakes. So again, we're just trying to shift a child into kind of stop mode from the negative behavior to kind of put us in a frame where we're looking at it as a non-judgmental kind of way, in a non-judgmental kind of way, and starting the dialogue, starting the, to give the kids language they need to, address some of those things that they're acting out to instead of, addressing in a verbal way themselves. Negative intent, a child says, "Move it, stupid." And the positive reframing would be, you wanted Kenny to walk faster. Then you could say, you could have a further conversation. Chances are a child might say, "Yeah, he's moving too slow," and then the dialogue starts. So a lot of the intent, the positive intent, starts with the parent to shift things and to avoid the power struggle of getting into that back and forth with your child when those types of behaviors occur. So again, you're going to notice that as we go along, there are things that you will be able to see how conscious discipline concepts kind of intertwine with each other. And so, we have to remain calm. Way back in week 2 when we talked about that, we have to have positive intent. The focus is on connection and not controlling, because we're trying to teach our children new skills so that they will have those life skills as they move on and become adults. So the other thing now is talking about consequences. And so consequences and choices, oftentimes we set up in ways that are not productive and really are no-win situations. So I'll give you an example. Your child is at the dinner table, and you say to them, after they've been sitting there for 30 minutes or so, you can eat those green beans or you can go to your room. Your intent is for them to eat their green beans. Then you get mad when they get up and go to their room, but you actually gave them a choice without realizing it. So you can't really be mad if they pick to go to their room, because you set that up, that the choice was eat your green beans or go to your room. So you have to really make sure that when you're giving choices, you're giving 2 acceptable options, so that either one is going to be okay with you when the child picks one or the other. So when you're saying things that set it up where they have a choice, and you think you've set it up, you think you've set it up where they're going to eat their green beans, they don't want to go to their room, but then you find out the hard way they wanted to go to their room, you can't really say, "Come back here and eat your green beans," because initially you gave them the choice. So sometimes as parents, we don't set choices up in a way that gets our need met or what our intention was. And our children are very, if they don't want to eat those green beans and the choice is go to their room, that's what they're going to pick. So you need to make sure that if that's what they choose, that that's an acceptable choice for them to make. So consequences. Consequences are something, again, that typically when, we were doing old school parenting, so to speak, consequences was something you got when you did something bad. But the shift here in the reframing for us as parents is to make sure that we teach our children that there are consequences for every action. And part of what we have to do is, in calm times, help our children weigh the pros and cons of the choices they make and what the consequence will be. So we often forget that, when we make a good choice, there's a good outcome and a good consequence, because typically in the past we've been so focused on the consequence of the bad behavior. So we're putting that aside now, because yes, we know that bad choices have bad consequences, but what we need to do to teach children the life skill of good decision making is to help them learn to weigh the pros and cons of one choice or the other and what the outcome to those might be. So again, those are dialogues. Those are based on connection with our children, relationship building, not focusing on punitive, and also knowing that at every moment we're teaching a skill. So let me go back to intent for 1 second. There's 3 types of intent. And the first is intent to punish. And, we've kind of talked about that. If you're putting a consequence out there with the intent to punish, that's one type of intent. The goal is to make the child feel bad, to punish rather than to teach. So that's the issue with that intent. If your intent is to punish, then 99% of the time, you're not going to be teaching that child a skill that they might need. The result is that this teaches the child how she or he should feel bad. It shifts the focus from what the child is feeling to how others think he or she should be feeling, and it shifts the focus from what happens to blaming others. So that's typically, where we came from back in the day. That was the intent typically of consequences. Then there's the permissive intent. And I think that this permissive parenting can cause lots of damage, and lots of times when you're being permissive, you don't even realize that's what's going on, and you don't realize what you're reinforcing. So permissive intent is the intent to rescue. You're rescuing your child from feeling badly. You're setting a consequence, but then you're not following through. And again, we're back to that word consistency. It's extremely important to be consistency in parenting. Kids need to know where the limits are, what the boundaries are. So, not following through on a consequence is an example of permissive intent. The goal is to have the child avoid the pain of the consequences of their actions. So, one of the ways children learn to make different decisions is by not being rescued from the consequences of the choices that they made. But sometimes, parents, because of their own baggage, and we talked a lot about parenting guilt in our first session. If you're carrying a lot of guilt around and you parent from that place, chances are you are a permissive parent with permissive intent. And that definitely teaches children nothing in regard to life skill. So, that's really difficult because, I've mentioned before that my sons are both autistic, and, that would be an example of where you want to try to save your kids. And so, the example that I'll give is in regard to being permissive and wanting to save is, when your kids are bullied, and you jump in to save them all the time without teaching them the skill that they need in life to stand up for themselves and verbalize that, that's when that becomes a problem. Because that's something that all kids need to learn. But when kids have special needs like that, for example, and they're able to be verbal, then that's definitely something that you have to really keep in check, that you're still teaching. You still have skills to teach to whatever capacity that can be taught. So the permissive intent teaches children not to trust themselves, but to trust others. And it shifts the focus from the issue to the child using his intellectual energy to avoid the punishment. When the adult withholds or imposes consequences with the goal of shielding the child from discomfort that grows naturally out of the child's choice, the child's opportunity to learn is squashed. And then the final is the intent to teach. So this is where the positive intent comes in. The intention depends upon attention. If you're focused on what you want your child to feel, think, your goal is control. If your goal is to teach, you must focus on the activity that happened, the aspect of your child, is behavior that you want to highlight, what you want him to reflect on, and what you want him to learn. So there's a whole, as you can see, a whole shift. Everything is about that learning process, and intent and consequences typically go hand in hand. So that's something to definitely keep in mind when you're getting ready to impose a consequence. Are you taking that from a learning perspective, or is it meant to be punitive? Is it meant to control a child's behavior? Is it meant to get them to do what you want to do? Because typically no learning takes place when you're in that intent. So there's also 3 types of consequences that we often refer to. And those are natural consequences, imposed consequences, and problem solving. So natural consequences arise without prearranged adult intervention, and they're the most powerful type of consequence. So a child is hurtful to other children, and then the other children don't want to play with them. So again, that requires a kind of restraint on our part to not go into punitive mode. But if that happens, that's a time to then be reflective with your child of, the choice that they made to be mean to their friends and what happened from there. So you can then have dialogue in a time when they're not, back here in their brain and upset and crying and carrying on because nobody wants to play with them, but then talk about that later in regard to, what was it that you did to Johnny? Oh, you hit him? How do you think that made Johnny feel? Why do you think the kids don't want to play with you? That is all information that kids need to begin to process to make a different decision. And that's our role, is to help them process and reflect in order to make a different decision. So the imposed consequence that arises with prearranged adult intervention. A child is hurtful, the adult makes him leave the play area. So again, there's no necessarily in that moment, if there's no follow-up, there's no learning that takes place and no reflection for that child to look back and make a different decision. If an adult is just laying down the consequences and there's no after discussion, then that's kind of where it sits. And then the third is problem solving. This is used when there's a chronic problem or when you can't think of an appropriate imposed consequence with the follow-up discussion. Again, those are conversations that when children are involved in, they can oftentimes come up with the solutions for themselves as they get older, especially. But the groundwork for that starts very early with children, helping them as their language develops, helping them where they are, develop those types of skills. So, it's really important to know that everything is a process in parenting. Consequences need to be not punitive, but learning. Our intent needs to be positive. We need to give appropriate choices, and we need to know that this is going to be an ongoing development from now until our kids are easier as they get towards 26, but you might still see your children making some decisions that you're kind of like, they should know better than this at 18, 19, 20, but you have to remember that prefrontal lobe is not developed until 26, and you will see kids making some choices and decisions that you thought you were well past, and clearly you're not. The other thing, the 7 powers for conscious discipline, the 7 superpowers that parents possess altogether: power of perception, which we've talked about, power of attention, take in the noticing the positive behavior, saying it out loud, talking about, the outcome of that, how it made other people feel, or that was helpful. When you shared your sandwich with your sister, that made her so happy. That made my heart warm. That was so helpful. Again, noticing that positive behavior, putting the words out there to it so that they know what that expected behavior is. The next power is the power of unity. The big idea is we're all in this together. And again, this is where the connection, the family connection comes in. And the goal is to perceive compassionately and offer compassion to others and to ourselves. So again, one of the things that many people said when we did the exercise of where you want to see your child at 26 and the attributes you want to see them possess, empathy and compassion were some of the things that people said. And in order to have your child become an adult who's empathetic and compassionate, we have to give that to them as the adults in their lives, as when they're children, so that they can learn that skill. And it makes the whole guiding and teaching be in a whole different frame. Power of free will. The only person you can change is you. Learning to connect and guide, again, instead of force and coerce. So, here's something that, parents sometimes kind of laugh when they hear. You go to your parent-teacher conference, and your parent starts talking about your child, and about halfway in you say, wait a second, are we talking about my kid? Because they're given all these glowing reports of, shares with others and is so kind to other people. And you think, well, that kid is a terror at home. But here's the thing, sometimes the best way to know that you're getting it right is when other people, when you're not there and your child is following through with what they're learning from you at home. So again, that's why it's so important to know that every moment is a teachable moment. When people are all living under the same roof, in the same household, people get on each other's nerves from time to time, and it might seem like they're at each other's throats all the time. But when you start hearing those types of comments, because they're behaving in a certain way at school or with their friends, then on some level that they're getting it. So, that the whole idea is to teach kids those skills that they need as they become older and into adulthood. So just kind of keep that in mind in your rough moments, because we all have them. The power of acceptance. The big idea is the moment is as it is. The goal to learn to respond what life offers instead of attempting to make the world go our way. That's a really big one, because as we've seen this past year, life has not gone the way most of us would have preferred that it went. So one of the skills that we have to teach kids, and this is true with consequences, is that we have to deal with life on life's terms. We need to deal with what's happening in the moment, and be able to process through that, because we can't necessarily shut down and just kind of make the world go away. So, learning to accept what is, that's extremely hard right now when families are kind of not going out like they used to, and that they're together more and more. So that's a skill that can be talked about and learned in times like this. And then the power of love. The big idea is to choose to see the best in others. The goal, seeing the best in others, keeps us in the higher centers of our brain. Again, that's where we want to be. So we can consciously respond instead of unconsciously react to life events. So one of the things that I've learned over the years is that, and thus the name conscious discipline, is, a lot of times in parenting, we just react to everything that comes our way. And when you're in that mode, you're just dealing with things right in the moment without a forethought or an afterthought. And so again, no teaching is going on. So this accepting and choosing to see the best in others and choosing to see the best in situations, that's a skill. That's not something that comes naturally to people, especially when, we're living through a situation like we're living through right now. But that is, again, a frame of mind that reframes how you see things. So one of the skills that we have to teach our kids is to be actors and not reactors. Because oftentimes when you're a reactor, that comes with a certain degree of drama and chaos. And we want to be conscious in the decisions that we're making, and we want our kids to be able to do that as well. And then the final superpower is the power of intention. And we've gone over that, several different types of intention. And our intentions, have to come from a place that are where we're looking to teach our kids skills. That's what parenting really is. And discipline is about guiding. It's about guiding our kids through life, teaching them the skills that they need as they're going to be adults. That's what we're doing. And it's hard to remember that sometimes because we're always right in that moment, and life is chaotic, and we're just trying to get through the day. So again, it's connection, relationships within the family, and developing those things so that all of those teachable moments can happen. So, hi Jacinta. So there is that. Intention, always, you have to, again, I had said before that really good parenting curriculums require parents to look at their own stuff and to see what we might need to work on in ourselves. So if we are constantly being in a punitive frame of mind, that's not setting us up to develop those relationships and to get our kids to learn all of those skills that we're trying to teach them. The skills that we talked about way back in week whatever. We want our kids to be compassionate. We want our kids to have integrity. We want our kids to be accountable, responsible. All of those things that we made our list, and we pointed out that those don't require formal education. You might have on your list that you want your child to have a college degree or go to college or go to some kind of training school. But when you step back and look at the list that you've made of what you want to see in your kids at 26, 99.9% of what's on that list do not require formal education. They're all social and emotional based skills that really are the things that our kids need to be successful in life. Those skills will take you further than you could even imagine. And even with the formal education, people can have formal education and not have those social and emotional skills and not do as well as people with a formal education and those social and emotional skills. So those are the things that we use to maneuver through life. So those are what's really super important. And that all of our parenting, like we talked about last week, all of our parenting needs to be self-esteem building. Again, if you came to parenting with little self-esteem or had self-esteem issues, again, that's something that we have to look at for ourselves because we have to improve our own self-esteem to build our children's self-esteem. So that's what I have for you tonight. Next week, I'm going to talk to you about how you approach your children's emotions and who you are as a parent. If you're dismissive, if you ignore, if you coach them through their emotions, and we're going to talk about the emotions of, happiness, sadness, anger, and how our own baggage can impact how we're able to deal with our children's big emotions. So that's what I have for you tonight. Again, we'll be replaying tomorrow at 10. I will put some of the handouts on the page in case you want to access those. And I hope that everybody has a great night, and we will see you next week.